Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Ever wonder what bridges the gap between your favorite film genres, subgenres, and movements? CinemaScope is here to explore these connections, taking you on a thrilling odyssey through the ever-evolving art of cinema. I'm your host, Andy Nelson, and in each episode, we embark on a deep dive into the forces that sculpt the world of film. From the styles you know and love, like heist films or the French New Wave, to the ones you may not be as familiar with, like Turkish Yeşilçam or Brazilian Nordwesterns, my expert guests and I unravel the complex tapestry of storytelling, style, and innovation that defines the world of film as we unpack the myriad catalysts of change that shape these diverse styles. Whether you're a student of film, a creative professional, or simply a devoted movie enthusiast, CinemaScope is your gateway to a richer, more immersive film experience. Don't just watch movies, understand them, appreciate them, and revel in their artistry with CinemaScope. Subscribe today.
What's up, Supernatural superfans? I'm Chrissy Lenz.
And I'm Nate McWhorter.
And we're the host of
Gang That Drink,
a supernatural drinking game podcast.
It's the podcast where we make up drinking game rules for a favorite episode of our favorite show, Supernatural.
We recap the episode for you and let you know how all the rules played out.
Then we let you know the drinking game rules for the next episode, so you can play along.
Plus, members get every episode early and ad-free,
with some extra bonus content chit-chat at the end of each episode as a member exclusive.
So download Gank That Drink, a supernatural drinking game podcast, wherever the finest podcasts are available.
And or become a member at truestory.fm/gankthatdrank.
And when you're out there in the world saving people and hunting things,
you know, the family business.
Keep the Gank That Drink motto in mind. Be excellent to each other and party on,
party on, dudes.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Pulse is over. Welcome to the internet.
Ishiki, 霊魂、何と呼んでもいいんだけど、それを受容できるエリアっていうのは残念ながら無限大ではなかった。
インターネットって勝手に向こうから繋がっちゃうもんなの？
でもいつか必ずいっぱいになる。そしたら魂は別のエリア、つまりこっちの世界へ進出してくるしか方法がない。
Okay, Andy.
Do you remember those days of when you'd get your internet and it came on a disc and you'd put
your
it in
AOL
and you'd install?
Yep. Oh, my God. AOL, CompuServe, I had them all.
Quite the flashback with this film.
Totally. Lots of fun sounds in this movie. Internet sounds, nostalgic internet sounds. I love baud tone. If we can have just that is another thing that's really missing in my life is baud tone. Had you seen this one?
I hadn't seen this one before. No, this was one that was new to me. I had seen, as we talked about in our member pre-show chat, we were talking about some other J-horror films, and I had seen Cure, another film that Kurosawa had made that was really creepy, really effective and haunting. Likewise, kind of a slower paced film, but designed to just amp up the tension and the atmosphere. Very creepy film. So I walked into this liking him as a filmmaker already, and I was very curious about it.
Okay, so what'd you think of the movie?
I liked it a lot. This was, it's an interesting one because there are elements to the story that I think if you're looking at it for perhaps logic and trying to figure out the way that things are actually happening, it may not actually make a lot of sense, but I think that's sometimes what works best in horror films, when things just don't make sense, but creepy things are happening anyway, and you can't really do anything about it. And the way that this film played with those elements and the framing, and particularly when other characters are in the distance or toward the back of a room or whatever, like some really haunting imagery. I think it made for a film that just kind of got under my skin and to that end worked well, especially because of the themes, which, I don't know, felt more relevant today than probably even in 2001 when the film came out.
Boy, that's the weird thing about it, right? Like that almost is the haunting of that this movie represents, is just how clear it's able to communicate the isolation and loneliness tropes, and what the internet will do ultimately. And it only took 20 years and change for us to realize just how right this movie was in the feel of transcendent loneliness that can be a part of an isolated internet experience. Using technology and alienation, like the internet as a conduit for supernatural forces is interesting to me, and it was matched really by how haunting the practical and I guess probably budgetary constrained production design this movie ended up being, because like those abandoned warehouses are sublime for scary stuff, right? Like they are able to communicate so much with just some charcoal, body-shaped charcoal on a wall. And I found myself legit anxious anytime somebody brought out a roll of orange duct tape. I think there's just so much compelling about it. I did say out loud to my wife when I took the headset off and finished the movie, I'm not entirely sure what that was all about. Like, it took rewatching some sequences and doing some serious reading to make sure that I understood who was who, what was what, and what everybody was going on about.
Yeah.
But man, a day later, and this movie is already aged very, very well for me.
The idea of this to take, I mean, within 10 years of when we were all introduced to the World Wide Web, right? I mean, this is 2001, so it's only, 7-ish years old. And to have a story that already is recognizing that people are getting lonelier as these internet connections kind of are created, they're spending less time with actual people. And the way that the film, just even the relationships that it's portraying, you're already getting this sense that these people just don't have real connections. Like, it really stood out to me when, we have there's 4 characters who work at this greenhouse, right? This place that sells plants and stuff. And one of them is missing at work. And so one of the girls goes to his house because they need this disc to get these, I don't know, something for their sales reports or something. I don't know what it is. But anyway, they have to go get this disc from his house. They haven't heard from him. She goes over there and it's creepy as all get out. And anyway, just to focus on my point, he ends up dying. And the next day they're talking about it. Like, she's taken with the police and questioned and all of this. And then the 3 of them are sitting at a cafe just kind of talking about it. They don't seem that broken up about it. The guy has some comments that are pretty telling about, just how he feels and how it's like, sometimes I kind of wish I were dead, and, hanging yourself seems like an easy way out, and just like some dark thoughts like that. But none of them seem connected. None of them, like the 2 girls, don't seem concerned that he's saying things like that. It's just like, it just is painting this picture of a world where people are having harder and harder times of actually connecting.
Right. And the movie sort of portrays that with a number of different models. One of them, you've already said, it's like the social construct breakdown, like they're not connected to weighty statements. And then we have this gradual emptying of the streets, right? That people are just sort of disappearing, and they're found alone, dead, lying down on the street. And then I found an article a little while ago about a woman who died at her desk in a cube farm in a bank and was found 5 days later, after a long weekend, dead at her desk. Nobody noticed.
Oh my
And I got to thinking, I wonder, how does this relate to any current trend? Because you hear about all the loneliness going on in the epidemic of loneliness, not just in Japan, but I see a lot of it in Japan. So I was just kind of searching, like, how does this relate to this movie? How prescient is this movie? And in 2024, so far, according to the BBC, nearly 40,000 people have died at home alone in Japan. Like, they're just found dead alone in their solo apartments. That seems, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know. Maybe they loved being alone. But it is a sad statement when you watch a movie like this. It does have a little bit more resonance that we were on a path and the movie is just a little bit prescient.
Yeah, it's terrifying. We also have another story. So we've got two stories going on. One is the story of the people who work at the plant shop. The other one is a young guy who, I think he's studying economics, and he decides, hey, you know what, I'm going to install this internet thing on my computer. And we watch him go through the process of installing it, and then suddenly it's starting to ask, questions like, do you want to see a ghost? Like,
yeah.
Wait, where are we going with this?
Always no.
Yeah. And it starts to show him just images of people alone in their rooms and stuff. And he, of course, freaks out and wants, it's trying to turn it off. And we follow him as he kind of, at his school, he goes to the computer lab to talk to some of the grad students who are studying computers about what's going on. And he ends up kind of talking to this woman, Haruo, who it tries to help him. He shows her what's going on. And of course, that ends up sending her down this spiral as she kind of is sucked into this. And it's interesting because she doesn't necessarily, like when we first meet her, she doesn't seem like she's alone, right? She's helping other students and is very friendly and conversational, but she's the one who is drawn into this, not him, not Kawashima, because, and I don't know, the way that he is portrayed is like, he is less, he doesn't buy into this idea of ghosts. He's very adamantly opposed to, being able to see things like that. And so is it just that he's just so dismissive of it right away? Like, exactly what happens?
But isn't it Kawashima at the end in the boat all affected and impacted?
Well, he does. Yeah. He ends up, even though he's saying it, because he's kind of our climactic guy. He sees that ghost come for him, and everything kind of comes into focus, I guess you could say. And he, as much as he's trying to deny it, he does end up having to buy into it. But through the bulk of the story, like, he's the one who's helping Haruo as she is taken by this thing and left catatonic and everything. And it's an interesting journey for him.
So the way I'm reading into this is that, that the movie's ideology, the movie's worldview is that loneliness is a contagion, right? And that loneliness and being alone are two different things, that you can be alone and feel great, right? And I think Kawashima is an example of that. Through the most of the movie, he's kind of an alone guy, but I wouldn't call him a lonely guy necessarily. Then he gets on the internet and eventually he succumbs to it. But for most of the movie, he's not. And everybody else that gets attached to it, they tend to have some sort of a partnership with other people in the movie. They are not what we might see outwardly as stereotypically lonely, but they aren't alone. And yet what they experience is, by getting sort of aloned upon by the ghost, the lonely ghost, they become catatonic. They become sort of infected by that same spirit. Is that kind of how you read it?
Well, it is kind of how I read it, but I do think that it's a little perhaps designed to be vague, like intentionally, because it's not exactly spelled out. Like, I mean, there are people, like, as we find out, Michi, she's our lead character in that other story of the people working at the greenhouse. She's trying to call her parents and drives up to see them, and they're gone. You could argue her parents shouldn't have been lonely. I mean, you never know. We can't say. We never meet them as characters in the film. But I do think that it's something that, I guess I would just say, latches on to those feelings in people, whether they're necessarily a lonely person or not. And again, that I think that speaks to Kawashima's character, who by the end of the film, he's the one who's been kind of fighting all of this and has been largely okay. But it's that ghost and that conversation that ghost has with him about, like, I can't remember what the ghost says, but it's like, I'm always here and you can't stop me. And he even goes to say, you're not here. And he goes up and his hands land firmly on the ghost's shoulders. And so he knows, oh, this thing is actually here and he can't. And maybe that's the line that crossed for him, that he has to recognize that this loneliness is actually here,
Yeah, right. We're not going to let you hide from this anymore. Kind of a message.
Yeah, right.
I feel like the other piece that hit me is that we're following young characters. And you're right. We do get a sense that the older adults in Japan are suffering from this too, but it focuses specifically on young adult characters that are experiencing this sort of profound loneliness. And I'm wondering what your take is on that. That we don't get the only older character we get really is the flower shop owner guy, who he seems to be doing fine.
Well, he ends up also taping up a room in the flower shop.
That's true.
Yeah, so
he tapes a room.
Yeah, so he also goes that path. I think that the idea, well, one, I think you're probably going to get a lot of horror filmmakers who like making films with young people, because I think the audience for horror, there's a lot of young people who really enjoy going to horror. So I think on the outside, looking at the just creation of horror in general, I think that is often going to go into the fact of who they're going to cast for horror films, But I do think in this particular case, the idea of college-age students works well, because this was new for all of us when the internet came into being. But I do think that there is an element of young people being a little more open-minded to experiment and play with new sorts of technologies like this. I mean, just look at our kids, and like they are so fluid on their phones and the electronic devices in their lives, whereas for us, it's like something that's taken a little more time to kind of learn and adjust with, because I think they get these things and just aren't necessarily afraid of just making mistakes and screwing something up. They just like go to town and go crazy. And I think we're tapping into that here, where young people are probably more adept at just jumping into these new technologies. At the same time, these are people who are relatively within a few years, freshly having left a bubble that they have always lived in of comfort, parents taking care of them and everything. And now they're on their own. And it's the first time. And it is that pivotal point in your life where you're trying to make those connections and create those bonds and find those networks of your own. And I do think that is part of where we end up here with these people as they're tackling this growing loneliness in their lives.
Yeah. And I mean, just like we were in 1995, right? Like, yeah. I kind of think we, like our generation, we are still, we're who's represented in this movie, though not Japanese. Like, we're still like first generation. Yes, we got our internet on a disk, or we got our first internet that was just terminal command line and figure out how to, download pictures. And now I found myself a little bit nostalgic for, weirdly, the simplicity of this kind of loneliness in my life when we were in the dorms trying to figure out what the internet would mean. And I think it's one of the things that makes this movie horrific is that it truly was not like this yet at that time, right? For those who didn't experience it, like, it wasn't this lonely. People weren't disappearing from the streets. It was still very sort of community focused. We had groups, we had humans, and we had the internet. And I think what makes this the sort of existential dread in this movie is that it figured out the fear of meaninglessness in the internet, like the meaninglessness of the struggle to find purpose, that only ends in a program asking you if you want to see a ghost, right? Like they found that 25 years before we knew it was coming.
Yeah, right.
That's one of the things that makes it scary.
Right. It's this idea of a technology that is offering things that we don't necessarily want to be a part of, and somehow tapping into it. And there's this idea of this afterlife. There's a few conversations in the film that kind of are key to tying all this, trying to tie it all together. And one of them is this idea that, what if all of these ghosts are out there and it's overflowing and they just need a way to come out, and they've just decided that they're going to come out into our world here and kind of take us, kind of take over, essentially bring us to their level or something. And also this idea that I think it was Haraway who was talking about, like, the idea of the afterlife, and this idea that how wonderful it could be where you get to actually see all of the people that you knew, and you get to kind of have all of them again, and you get to hang out with everybody again. But then on the flip side, what if that's not true? What if it's just this sense of loneliness and you're completely alone? And that's all you end up having. And at the end of the film, that's kind of what this final ghost is, that says to the guy that, like, yeah, that's it. You're going to be alone. And that's pretty horrifying. And it's terrifying the way that you end up leaving things with this film.
How do you think all of this is massaged or molded by the camera, by the look of the film? From, let's see, who was it? Junichiro Hayashi?
It's simple. There's not a lot of movement. I think a lot of the movement is just when it happens, it's pretty slow, pretty gentle.
Well, this is the thing I wanted to know from you, though. There are some sequences where the ghost is approaching a person and it does the weird body movement thing, right? Were we still trying to figure out what that body movement was to make ghosts so scary in this movie? Or when did that weird ghost creepy crawly shoulder dislocation thing start? Do you know?
I don't know, but I feel like J-horror was really playing around with that. Like,
oh yeah,
you're getting that through Ringu, Ju-on here. Like, you're getting these sorts of movements with these ghost creatures where, well, and you could almost even, and I don't think that they were necessarily pulling from this, but thinking back to like Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula,
for sure,
where when he shot the three, I can't remember, the vampire ladies who were trying to seduce Keanu Reeves' character, there were elements where Coppola wanted to do something different and had them choreograph this whole thing in the bed where they would be able to reverse the film, and that's how they played it. And so the actresses had to learn their movements all backward. And so when you actually watch it, it just throws you off because they're moving forward, but it all is just slightly off because we're watching it play forward, but in reality they're actually moving backward, and that just throws it off a bit. And I can't help but feel like there was some of that here, and I'm thinking specifically of the one that Yabe ends up getting attacked by. That's like the first real ghost attack that we see, where he ends up finding the boss's red taped room at the bottom of the greenhouse and goes into it, and this ghost appears and comes toward him in movements that just don't seem human. And I think a lot of it is just like there was probably some reverse photography and that sort of element that just made it all the more haunting. Likewise, later in the film, there's this element of, it's not even like digital fuzz, but it's almost like the image itself is blurred out or smudged in some way. And like there's that, I can't remember which character it is, but it's a ghost that is facing away from the character, and then it turns around. But the way that it turns to face them, it's almost like it kind of like smudges itself around to kind of face forward. And it's just like, I don't know. That one felt maybe like there was some digital work done in it, or perhaps just a kind of a filter put over to blur it a little. I couldn't tell, but super creepy.
Well, similar to you already mentioned the very last ghost approach when it came up toward Kawashima, when everything's blurred except for, and I thought you were making a joke when you said it, and everything sort of comes into focus, but it's just the eyeballs. Oh my God. That was so creepy. That was a great, great, great effect. Well used. And I think so much of it so much of what the film does well to create this haunting environment is, I'll go back to Skinamarink. Like what Skinamarink leans so heavily in is just static shots. And in Skinamarink's case, they're usually tight shots or weird angled shots on things that you normally wouldn't look at. On this, it's like, here's a wide shot of a room, and we're not going to move the shot, and you're going to see something in it that's funky, and it's going to scare you, or it's going to approach the camera in a way that's unsettling. But we're not going to move the camera because that so deeply communicates emptiness and isolation. And that coupled with these fantastic choices for location, I think, just lend well to Hayashi's ultimate sort of eye for this thing. I think it's really cool. A lot of stuff shot through other things, right? Through doorways, through windows, lots of layers. There's one of the greatest sequences, I think, is when we meet what's her name in the computer classroom. Like the way they use that space with all the computers and just wires hanging to separate physical space is almost as much of a barrier as a wall would be, and yet we can see through it. It's like, but they don't see through it, I think that's one of the pieces of this movie that I think is really compelling, is what do our characters notice about the world they're living in, and what do they miss that we see? And I think the movie does a really good job at that.
Well, and something else that Kurosawa does here that is incredibly effective is building frames where we don't necessarily catch right away that there actually is another figure in the frame, right? We're looking at a couple characters, and then we're like, oh, is that actually, yeah, that is a person back there. And that's, again, with these static shots where you're just looking and then your eyes just drift and you go, oh, that's a person back there. Like, I mean, we start right away when Michi goes over to Taguchi's house to find this missing disc, and she's poking around, and he's got this weird, like, kind of translucent shower curtain sort of room partition, which is like, I'm not sure what sort of room decor that is, but it's kind of that translucent hanging into a back room with a window, and we see a figure standing back there, and we're, as the audience, going, oh, is that the ghost? And then she kind of sees it, and she finally sees it and goes through and goes, oh, it's Taguchi, and has this conversation, and he seems okay. She doesn't take any stock that he's grabbing a rope out of a box, and he goes into another room, says, yeah, the disc's out there, go find it yourself. And so she does, and then she goes to ask him a question, and of course he's hung himself in a gruesome, horrific fashion. It's just awful to look at.
But he was already dead, though, right? Like, she was talking to the ghost of him, or was he was just affected and hung himself?
Yeah, right. And I think that's the thing. Like, some people kill themselves. Like, we see a number of different suicides after people have kind of been affected by this ghost and have gone into this catatonia, and then they seem okay. Like, there's this moment where they kind of snap out of it and they seem kind of fine, and then they'll kill themselves, and that's when they turn into that black ash. But then there are also some people like Junko who never quite gets to the point where she kills herself, and so she just like fades off into black ash, and then that was the one time where the ash like blew away, essentially. So
I didn't care for that.
It was, yeah,
because there was some. He was. I don't remember who was in there. Was it Kawashima?
Michi was in there with Junko.
Right, Michi was in there, and all I could think was, Michi, hold your damn breath. Yeah, like, you don't want to breathe lonely ash.
So that was interesting. But like those shots of, like, we first see Taguchi, he's that figure standing back there. We see that creepy kid standing in the book stacks at the library. There's the horrific one when Michi, I can't remember what point this is, but she has just gone to, again, another creepy abandoned factory, and she's walking past a wall, which also happens to have black ash smudges on it. And then as the camera pans, it finds her as she's like looking at her phone or something, and we see a figure standing up on top of this, I don't know, smokestack sort of thing at this factory. She climbs over a ladder and then just jumps off, and after Michi sees her, she jumps off, and we follow her as her body, as her body falls and hits the ground. And like, so these figures that pop up in the back are incredibly haunting. And I think that's one of those things that you find in some of these J-horror films that work exceptionally well. And it just is very off-putting.
Yeah, that's what we call it. It's off-putting. Oh my God. So you throw around Kurosawa's name like you know him personally. What do I need to know about him as a director?
I have only seen one other film by him, and I mentioned it. It was Cure, which is a really creepy film. He is another of these filmmakers. I think he started out as a film critic for a while and then started making his own films. Yeah, I mean, certainly somebody who is kind of like still working, a new film called Cloud that came out in 2024. I just haven't seen a whole lot, but definitely somebody who I enjoy the tone of his films and the way that he crafts his stories.
Yeah, I don't feel like I like we can make any sort of directorial fingerprint statements, but I'm really interested in how this movie that could have been much more overtly gruesome ended up being really, I think, tastefully sedate and restrained. And I think that makes it more existentially terrifying than just, horrific. And I think it's a matter of just his taste, but I'm curious to see, how that expands more broadly to his collection.
Well, and he is a filmmaker who has actually said he's trying to do different types of films. Like he doesn't necessarily want to have his directorial style locked in. There's a quote from him: "The next thing I want to do is something I've never done." So I think he's always looking for new things. I mean, people talk about like Stanley Kubrick, Tarkovsky as directors who they kind of compare him with as far as style and everything, but he also has talked about how Hitchcock and Ozu really kind of contribute to what he's doing. And so I just need to see more of his films, because with Cure and Pulse, they seem very similar. So I'm curious, if I go through his filmography, do I get a different sense from him as far as what he's doing?
Yeah.
I'm always curious with this as a storytelling style, but this is a film that it starts on the ship, right? We have this ship captain come down and we see this woman standing looking out at sea, and we realize in pretty short order that this is our protagonist. And then we get the flashback and we get the whole setup to the story as she's trying to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, by the time we get to the end, getting onto this ship, and we have the final bit on the ship. She goes into the room to see her friend Kawashima, who these two storylines have crossed, and now she and Kawashima are on this ship. And of course, that's when Kawashima also disappears. And so we're at this point where I guess it's not completely a wraparound story, but it's certainly a story that starts on the ship, flashes back to fill us all in, and then ends on the ship. How does that work? Did you need to start on the ship? What did you think?
I didn't. I'm not sure it was all that effective for me. I get sort of the instinct to do it, and I like the way it was portrayed. Like, we have that high shot from way up in the sky looking down at this boat on the ocean, and I thought that was really cool. Did I need to open with that and close it? Did I need the framing device? I don't think so. I think starting with sort of a subdued life in motion would have been fine for me, and ending on the boat is still great. I like the fact that she ended up on the boat, but it feels a little bit overwrought to make that framing element, have that framing element in the first place. Was it something of power for you?
No, I also, when I realized we start on the boat and I'm kind of getting a sense, and then we come back and we find her in town, I'm like, oh, is that the future? We're kind of, we'll get to a point where she's on a boat. I just don't know what that gave to us to have it start that way. Like, it didn't seem necessary. I felt like the same, that by the time I got to the end, I'm like, okay, so they're on the boat, and yeah, it was fine. I just didn't feel like we needed it that way. So it was one of those where I questioned, I'm like, what is the benefit of starting that way?
Yeah, I still having seen the movie, I can't answer that. I don't understand what the purpose was.
Yeah. Likewise, the other question I had about that, as far as the boat and everything, it's interesting because we kind of get this sense from the captain that they're heading to Latin America and that this is a global pandemic of sorts. This isn't just something that's just happening in Japan, but it's happening around the world. How does this fall for you in the scope of pandemic films? Did it feel like you were watching a pandemic film?
That's a really interesting question. Until you said the word pandemic, and realized that this is, oh right, it's not so much a ghost loneliness story. They're trying to make it a pandemic. Yeah, I guess I thought it was fine. It's a little bit hat on a hat if we now make it a disease film. Loneliness is a disease. You know,
Yeah.
like there's so much about this movie, in the core of this movie, that what makes it scary is that we're ultimately scared of ourselves and our place in the world. And I really like that. And I wonder if once it becomes a disease film, that we're othering the experience to the point that it distracts or detracts from the fear of self that I think makes the movie important to me.
Yeah, I think there's an element. I mean, I like the idea that it's, in a sense, talking about how this isn't just something in Japan, but everyone around the world is dealing with this internet thing. It's the world wide web, not the Japanese wide web. And we're all potentially affected by this thing. And so I liked that element of it. I do also think, like, well, I don't know if it works quite in that vein of turning into something that is like this pandemic. Like, is Latin America safe? Can we get to Latin America? You know, like that element of it. I wasn't quite sure if it completely worked, but like, it seems like the only way to really survive this sort of thing is just to remove technologies from your life and just kind of go back to caveman sort of living, you know, or not caveman.
I mean, do we have to go all the way back to caves?
I know. I went back a little far. That was a bit of a step.
I mean, 1984 was a good year for me, man.
Yeah, all right, fine. But I think that's the thing. And it's like, I guess that's what it's saying. Or just finding ways to create community again. Like, that's something that I'd be curious to see, like, if it addressed a way where people were actually creating communities with or without technology, is that still something that could somehow find a way to bypass the ghosts?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that you know, in addition to loneliness, there's so much about when he puts in the disc and it says "Welcome to the internet." Have what does he say? Have a good time. He says have fun. He says, okay, I'll have fun. Like, that entire vibe is, I don't know what's going to come next. And that the movie's about the fear of the unknown and the fear of what hath we wrought. And people are turning into chalk dust as a result of it. And I don't need the movie to be bigger than the personal experience of that. Is this one of those movies that was remade?
Oh yes, we'll talk about that for sure.
Okay, because I feel like maybe that's where, like, telling more personal stories from other places in the world or other places in Japan, that might communicate just enough. But I think I'm putting my finger on what I don't love about it, is the fact that we are trying to find safe harbor and making this essentially like a zombie escape film or a disease escape film. Because I think ultimately what is most important about this is that you can't escape it.
Yeah,
there's going to be no answer.
But I think we get that. Like, I do think that it gives us that, because, I mean, you know, Kawashima on the ship, he also ends up disappearing. And I feel like, I don't know, I guess I didn't necessarily, I don't think that, I mean, talking, you know, this whole thing about the pandemic and stuff, I don't necessarily think it pushed too hard down that road to the point where it really became another sort of disease escape sort of film. Like, I don't think it was there, but I do think that you could see a potential for that direction with it, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I just had one other thing I have to call out, going back to the way that it looked. there were a couple shots of characters on like riding a bus. And then we had a shot also, or a scene where two of our characters are riding on a train. There was something about particularly the bus scenes were filmed that seemed so artificial, like it just seemed disconnected from the environment. It looked like a bus with, a 50s rear screen projection of like the city moving behind them. It just felt so artificial. And even when they were on the train, there was something about just the way that it was moving that just never felt like it was actually a real train. And I can't help but feel like that idea of those spaces feeling like artifice just somehow worked for me in creating this haunting vibe of this space,
That's what I was thinking. Is it budget? Is it intentional? Is it both? Either way, I agree. There is a mood that comes from those, and I think we get the same thing with some of the effects that they use with the tape on TV, right? When we get those shots of the TV and TV starts slowing down and split framing, and it gives you that same kind of unreal vibe.
Right. Yeah. No, it's creepy. Like there's the one where Kwashima is watching it. It's like a guy walking across a room and the guy is like glitching out and disappearing and then appearing again a few steps farther. But it's just like, it was just haunting the way that it all kind of unfolded. And that also kind of tapped into how the ghosts were appearing. They had that same sense of just disconnect with the space they were in when we did have the ghosts show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Creepy. Very creepy. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, we'll be right back. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Frank Schlimbach, Francesco D'Andrea, Flint, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.
In a world where technology's cold embrace threatens to isolate us, a specter looms in the digital realm. It seeps through the cracks of our screens, whispering promises of connection, only to leave us more alone than ever. This is the haunting tale of social media, a landscape littered with the ghosts of missed opportunities and superficial interactions. But amidst this bleak landscape, a flicker of hope emerges, a sanctuary for those who yearn to connect over a shared passion, the love of cinema. Letterboxd, a platform that dares to defy the isolating forces of the internet, beckons to weary souls seeking true companionship. At first glance, Letterboxd might appear to be just another social media phantom, luring unsuspecting users into its depths. But as you venture further, you realize that this is no ordinary haunting. The spirits that dwell here are kindred spirits, united by their love for the silver screen. In this digital realm, the ghosts of loneliness and disconnection are banished by the warmth of genuine interaction. Film lovers from all walks of life gather to share their thoughts, debates, and recommendations. The isolation that once plagued us melts away as we forge connections through the movies that move us. But beware, for not all is as it seems. The true power of Letterboxd lies in its ability to transform the haunting experience of social media into a joyful haunt. With a Letterboxd membership, you gain access to a world where the specters of ads and limitations are cast out, replaced by an enhanced experience that allows you to fully immerse yourself in the community. As a member, you become part of a select group of individuals who have dared to embrace the haunting beauty of Letterboxd. You unlock personal stats, the ability to track your film collection, and the power to customize your profile like never before. The ghosts of anonymity are banished, and you become a true presence in this cinematic sanctuary. And now, dear listener, The Next Reel offers you a chance to join this haunting tale. By visiting thenextreel.com/letterboxd, you can claim a 20% discount on your Letterboxd membership, and it works for renewals as well. It's an invitation to step into this ghostly realm and discover that, perhaps, the true horror lies not in the technology that connects us, but in the missed opportunities to forge genuine bonds through our shared love of film. So dare to embrace the haunting allure of Letterboxd. Join us in this ghostly sanctuary where the specters of isolation are banished and the spirits of cinema reign supreme. Together we can transform the haunting experience of social media into a joyful celebration of the art form we cherish. Visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd, claim your discount, and become part of this haunting tale. Because in the end, it's not the technology that defines us, but the connections we make through the stories we share. Letterboxd awaits, ready to welcome you into its ghostly embrace.
Andy, Pulse, the remakes. Were there 500 of them?
Not 500, but there was, of course, a U.S. remake, 2006, produced by Joel Soisson. IMDb rating on this one, 4.7. Just for comparison's sake, the film we just talked about, 6.5 on the IMDb scale. So, yeah.
Outstanding. Okay.
Kurosawa did a novelization himself of his own script. And then in 2008, we had the straight-to-DVD sequel, Pulse 2 Afterlife. This one was directed by Joel Soisson, IMDb rating 3.4. And then also, same year, another straight-to-DVD sequel, Pulse 3 Invasion, also directed by Joel Soisson, IMDb 3.7. So some pretty terrible straight-to-DVD sequels and the U.S. remake. I remember the remake coming out, and it had some pretty people at the time where you were like, okay, I've heard of those actors before, like Kristen Bell, Ian Somerhalder, Christina Milian, and so I'm like, okay, I've heard of them, but I've heard nothing good about the actual movie.
All right, I'm not going to watch it.
I was tempted. I was like, I think I'll watch Pulse and its remake. And then I read about the remake. I'm like, yeah, no, I think Pulse is fine. I think Pulse is just fine. I don't need to see the remake.
How about an award season? 6.5. That's got to guarantee it got some love.
It got some love, not a ton. It had 2 wins with 3 other nominations. This film did play at Cannes in the Uncertain Regard category, but it lost to Boyhood Loves. At the Sitges Catalonian International Film Festival, it won the José Luis Guarner Critics Award. It was nominated for Best Film, but lost to Pitov's Vidok. And at the Japanese Professional Movie Awards, Kumiko Aso won Best Actress. And one of ours that we've talked about before on the show, the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards. It was nominated for Most Disturbing Import, which is their category name for Best Foreign Film, but lost to Calvaire. Have you seen Calvaire?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen it. Never even heard of it. But it also sounds like a disturbing import.
Yeah, this one, it's, I think, French. A few days before Christmas, traveling entertainer Mark Stevens is stuck at nightfall in a remote wood in the swampy Haute-Fagnes region of Liège when his van breaks down. An odd chap who's looking for a lost dog then leads Mark to a shuttered inn.
Oh, is that the scary part? Probably.
Probably when it gets to the shuttered inn.
It happens at the shuttered inn.
Yeah.
Everything happens in a shuttered inn. Okay. All right. Well, at least it was noticed.
Yeah.
It was not forgotten.
No.
And that brings us to the box office. How did it do at the box office?
Well, like last week, this one was difficult to find much in the way of financials. This film released February 3rd, 2001 in Japan, and then didn't get a U.S. release until November 9th, 2005, opposite Derailed, Mathura, and the limited release of Pride and Prejudice. It looks like it did earn $49,000 domestically and $231,000 during its Hong Kong release, which is $501,000 in today's dollars. I didn't have anything from Japan, though, so I don't know how it did there. I'm assuming it did fine. That's all I could find, unfortunately. So while it may not have been enough to earn its money back on its initial release, it is possible that its cult status may have gotten it there. But again, no information from Japan. I'd like to think it did well there.
You think they're hiding there? I think they're hiding the box office dollars. They just don't want you to know. Does it ever feel personal like that to you sometimes?
Yeah. Anyone but Andy can see this.
ABA. ABA.
I will say with this film, one of the posters of it, it's such a terrible, misleading poster. It's like a computer screen. It's got the red tape around the poster and everything, but it has like a person trapped inside a computer screen image. And I don't like that because it doesn't sell it well. It's like the sort of movie poster that it's just like you see the movie and you're like, well, that poster was nonsense. This is one of those posters.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up later. I think that's with her, like, looks like she's trying to get out of the computer screen, like that whole reaching hand thing. That's nowhere close. That's just a real misalignment. It's somebody who had a list of posters to design and hadn't seen any of the movies that they were designing for.
Right.
Just like log lines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Not great.
No, terrible. Oh, well. But the movie's great. I really enjoyed it. This was a film that has a lot of moments that are going to stick with me.
Me too. It was fun.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, we'll be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, Babak Anwari's 2016 Iranian ghost story, Under the Shadow.
خانه اعزام کنن ایلام
اینجا که درست وسط جنگه
خود تو بری من میترسم
نداره عزیزم تو تا چشم به هم میزنی من برگشتم
این کوفتی که نیومده همینجور بیاد بالا سر ما مطمئنم با خودش یه چیزایی آورده اینا بابان هر جا بری میان دنبالت
همه دارن جمع میکنن شهر میرن
ما هم جمع کنیم بریم
نه نمیشه کسی برش داشته
کی برش داشته هیچ کی برش نداشته جز من و تو هم هیچ کی تو این خونه نیست دیگه از شهرشون در امان نیستیم
چون که اونا دارن میان
Another Friday night, another bowl of ramen, another deep dive into Japanese horror with a side of existential dread. But who can you talk to about the subtle brilliance of the cinematography, the symbolism of the abandonment as it relates to your own brewing despair? Your cat? Please. He's practically a ghost himself. Are you cripplingly lonely? Do you spend more time with fictional characters than actual humans? Do you find yourself quoting obscure Japanese horror films to bewildered grocery store clerks? Quote alone no more. There's a better way. It's the Next Reel family of film podcasts. Confetti, dancing partners, awooga eyes. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you can escape the existential void with bonus content to every one of our episodes almost, but not quite. Early access to those same episodes, ad-free listening, a standing invitation to our live stream chats, and access to our super secret Discord channels. People understand you here. They appreciate your in-depth analysis of cinematic use of negative space. You're home. Join the Next Reel family of film podcasts because eternal loneliness is so last century. Visit thenextreel.com/join and sign up today. Because here at the Next Reel's family of film podcasts, we're not your family, but we might just be close enough. Here we are. It's Letterboxd time. What do you? I mean, we liked this movie. We share a like of this movie. What does that mean to this review?
This was one that I just found very effective. I don't think I liked it as much as Cure. I have to go look now and see what I rated Cure when I watched that, because I really liked Cure. I think I rated Cure 4.5 stars. And I think this one I am good with 4 stars in a heart. And definitely one that I'll think about and return to.
Yeah, that's where I'm landing too. Does it change the way I live my life? No, but was it a good haunty spooky fest? Yeah, it was good. I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff.
And I like that it didn't lean in to the horror so much, to the gruesome stuff so much. This movie knew where its guardrails were. Just wanted to say that. Important. Movie knows its own guardrails.
Yeah. But it allows for terrifying moments, like when
Yeah.
Yobe is hiding behind the couch and
Oh, yeah.
that creepy ghost crawls over the couch toward him,
Fingers.
right? Yeah.
Scary Japanese hands.
Yeah. Yeah. So creepy. So creepy.
That's also the name of my band.
I thought it was going to be Lonely. What was it? Lonely Dust?
No.
Breathing Lonely Dust.
What was it? Lonely Ghost Ash?
Lonely Ash.
Lonely
right.
Ash. Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, that'll average out to 4 stars and a heart over on our Letterboxd account, which is the next reel. And you can find me there at Soda Creek Film. You can find Pete there at Pete Wright. So what did you think about Pulse? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
So I'm going to go first because it's really short and it doesn't really directly relate to the movie, but I think it's something that we can embrace. This is a 4.5 star and a heart by Might Be McQuaid. And it just says, I love being wrong about movies on second viewing. Pretty good. That's pretty good.
I've been known to fall into that camp myself. Yep.
All right. What do you got?
I've got a 4.5 star and a heart by Wesley R. Ball, who has this to say, and also rated it 89. It includes the number ranking, 89 out of 100. Finally, a horror movie that makes me confront my deepest fear: the Windows 98 interface.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah. I'd be hard pressed to bracket 3.0, 3.1, 95, 98, 2000. Like, what they all are cursed in their own special way.
Well, you were off of it by the time whatever it was that came out around 2010. Like, that was.
Oh, no, I was off of it. Because I was still working on it at work through 2006, but I had purchased my first Mac in 2002. And that was when I did the commercial and had a child. All of those things line up. But I had gotten through 2000 XP. Like, the first one I didn't use as a daily driver was, I think, Windows. Was there a 10 or 11? Which was the
10?
Yeah,
10 was
10.
98. Me was terrible.
Oh,
Me.
no, yeah, no. You know what? I didn't use Me because I was always,
Windows
Who would
Me.
use Me?
Me was
Windows
so bad.
Me was like your mom's Windows.
2000 was great, and anyone who switched off 2000 into Me realized how bad it was, and
it was
immediately
upsetting.
went back to 2000.
Was Me? You probably know this. Windows Bob. Do you remember Windows Bob?
No, is that a thing?
Yeah. No, of course. I don't make stuff up. Microsoft. It was not Windows Bob. It was Microsoft Bob. And it was supposed to be the even more user-friendly than 3.1, 95, and NT, and it got rid of the Windows Program Manager. So it was like I just remember it because you'd log in and you were sitting by a fireplace. It was a picture of like a Barca lounger and an end table and a fireplace and built-in bookshelves, and it was like homey, and there was a dog, and the dog was like asking you was like Clippy. It was like the upgrade to Clippy. It was a dog sitting there and you would talk to the dog. And that was like, Rover is the character. There it is. The assistant was Rover.
Wow.
I did not care for Microsoft Bob, although I remember having a conversation with my dad. Should I upgrade to Bob? And he should not, and he did not, because it was a downgrade and it didn't last very long.
Yeah, there were some rough years with Windows. Yeah. I'm glad to
you try stuff, Microsoft.
Yeah.
Sure you do.
Yes, as we all do.
So worked up, I spit on my own computer.
Should I say your line?
Oh, thanks, Letterboxd. All that stays in.
all that Windows talk. Yeah, that was good stuff. Oh my God. All right. Hey, film fans, Andy here from The Next Reel. Can you believe we have recorded almost 700 episodes dissecting and discussing movies? It's a testament to our incredible community of listeners like you. Your support means the world to us, and one great way to show that support is by sporting some Next Reel merch. We've got shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, all featuring designs from movies we've covered on the show. Looking for a place to start? Grab a tee or hoodie with the Next Reel logo to rep your love of film. We've got our auteur theory design in there, along with our Patient Zero, plus many designs from movies we've discussed on the show. So head to thenextreel.com/merch and grab some gear today. Every purchase helps us keep the mics hot for our weekly movie chats. And thanks as always for being part of the Next Reel community.